So there comes a time in every Volkswagen owner's life when they have to sell their car. Now usually that's because it's broken, but today we actually have to end this project on a high note. The Mk7 GTI we've been working on for 2 years right here in this shop has moved on to its new home under its own power with a happy reader behind the wheel promising to take it on many more track days. We've pulled that car right out of a Carvana vending machine as a bone stock, totally unmodified GTI and turned it into a car that's as quick as a new Honda Civic Type R, still a fantastic daily driver, and also a competitive entry in something like the tire rack one lap from America. Today, we're going to sit back and look back at every single thing we did to the car. We've strung every single shorter video together into over an hour of just working on the car, playing in the garage, and turning a pretty boring street car into a pretty fast track car. So sit back, relax, and watch us take a Volkswagen from bone stock to competitive. We're about to take our GTI to its first track day, so we're going to walk you through what we're going to do to get it ready. We've taken a lot of cars on track over the years, and we've developed a pretty decent checklist for what you need to look at before you go out there. We're going to start with a real kind of surface level overview of the car. We're going to walk around it a few times, take a look just from 5-10 feet away, and just see if anything sticks out to us. You know, over the years we've caught, delaminated tires, exhaust systems hanging, big oil leaks under the car that are leaving puddles, all that sort of stuff you would never even think to check for on a normal tech sheet, but it's good to take a kind of a broad overview and check it out first. From there, we'll move on to the interior of the car. We'll make sure that we can get in the car and buckled up safely. We'll make sure there's no floor mats in our way. And then we'll make sure we can get out of the car and actually practice our exits, even if we're just going to a local track day. Fire is bad, and it's really, really good to be able to get away from it as quickly as possible. Once we're finished with the interior, we'll move on under the hood. We'll make sure the car's fluids are okay. We'll check the oil and change it if it's been a while. We'll look at the air filter, and we'll look for leaks, frayed belts, worn motor mounts, anything like that. We'll also take a look at the battery hold down in the car. It's really, really common for people to fail tech at their first track day because their battery isn't actually bolted down. And odds are yours isn't if you've ever had a parts store put the battery in. We will give the battery a good shake. We'll make sure it's not going to go anywhere on track. And then we'll take a look at brake fluid. So why do we care so much about brake fluid? Isn't it okay if it's a little old? No, and the reason is brake fluid is hygroscopic, which means it loves water. Every time brake fluid meets a water molecule, it gives it a big hug and it sucks it right into the fluid. And wet brake fluid is bad because brakes get really, really hot. It's easy to hit 600, 700, 800 degrees at a track day with stock brakes. And when you have fluid that hot, the boiling point of water is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So that water will boil and turn into steam, and steam is compressible, unlike brake fluid. That means that when you're pushing on the brake pedal, you're just compressing steam instead of actually making the brake pads move. So how do you figure out if your brake fluid is still good or not? The answer is probably that it's bad if you've picked up a used car. That just kind of comes with the territory, and we will find any excuse possible to change our brake fluid. But there are a few ways to tell if your fluid is ready to be changed, especially if it's a car you're tracking regularly or one you've owned for a long time. So the easiest way to tell if you need to change your brake fluid is by measuring the moisture content. You can pick up a brake fluid tester like this for $5 or $10 online, and all this is a little electronic device that measures the continuity between two metal pins here and then infers the moisture content of the fluid it's put in. And these are great. You can bring them with you to the track, you can test your fluid often, and it's just a fantastic way to figure out if there's any water in your fluid and if it's ready to be changed. But one thing to know is that modern cars actually have very well sealed systems. It's not the 60s anymore. A modern car won't actually absorb that much fluid into its brakes just with normal use in a normal environment. But there is another way to tell the age of the fluid, and it's this device called Brake Strip by Phoenix Systems. This is a Ford branded one. A lot of dealers will use these. And what this actually measures is a little test strip that almost looks like something you'd measure pool chlorine with. You can actually measure the dissolved copper content of the fluid. Now, that's one good proxy to figure out the age of the fluid because there's copper in brake systems, it dissolves into the fluid over time, and by figuring out how much is in there, you can infer the age of the fluid. So we like to use both. This one does a better job of telling us how old the fluid is, and this one does a better job of telling us the condition of the fluid. And basically, if a fluid fails either test, we will change it as quickly as possible, especially before we go on track. So we said we change the brake fluid every single time we pick up a used car. What do we change it with? I'll start with what you shouldn't use, the big cheap bottle of fluid from your local parts store. Now this isn't bad for a street car, and that's why we have the bottle of it, but it's bad for a few reasons. First of all, I've never seen somebody that actually has a brand new unopened one of these in the garage. Every single one in my garage at least has been open for 3 years now. So you can't use this in a track car. You really shouldn't even use this in a street car, and I should throw this away. The other main reason you shouldn't use this in a track car is the boiling point. So reading the label, The dry boiling point of this fluid is 480 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wet boiling point is 311 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that's not bad. Again, it's perfect for a street car, but you can find fluids with higher boiling points, and we'll probably get this fluid up to 500 degrees in our Golf on track. So I'm going to put my handy dandy label on here with its boiling points and move it over out of contention. So we're not supposed to use the giant parts store brand. What should we use instead? How about a full-on racing brake fluid like Wilwood XR? Now, this is a fantastic fluid. We use it in all of our race cars. It works great, and it has a 645 degree dry boiling point and a 432 degree wet boiling point. Now, that's fantastic. This fluid is awesome, but we're not going to put it in our Golf GTI project car, and there's one key reason here. Off-highway use only, not DOT approved. Now, does that matter? Honestly, in Florida, it's a little bit like the Wild West. Nobody would ever care. But there's no real guarantee that this will work well in a street car over time, or that it won't absorb moisture at a faster rate than a DOT-approved fluid. So we're always a little hesitant to put a non-DOT fluid into a street car. So put my handy-dandy label on that with its boiling points and put it out of contention too. So it would be ideal to find a fluid that's streetable and DOT approved like this part store brand, but has high boiling points like this Wilwood race fluid. And we think it's this Wilwood 600 Plus racing brake fluid that is DOT approved, so it won't void any warranties, it won't absorb moisture at a very accelerated rate. It should be perfect. Now, it does give up a little bit compared to the XR. This fluid boiling point is 572 degrees dry and 383 degrees wet. However, we think it should still be plenty for our GTI, and that's why we're going to use it for the street car. Then we'll put the car up on a lift or on jack stands, and we'll take a look at the suspension. Again, we're just looking for things that are out of place. Worn bushings, missing rubber, broken sway bar end links, anything that has more play than it should. We're just trying to find anything that's going to bite us once we get out on track. Once we've done a general overview, we always try to put a car on an alignment rack or use a string alignment setup in our own garage, and make sure that the car's wheels are all pointed in the right direction. We always like to have a good tow hook on our cars, so that way there's way less of a risk of damage if somebody needs to pull us out of a tough situation. So what tow hook should you use? Now, our GTI, like most modern cars, comes with this tow hook that threads through a hole in the front bumper. And this is totally fine. You can go and do a bunch of track days with this, but there's an issue here, and that's that it sits on the front of the car like your car is going jousting. It sits sticking right out like this, and that means that A, it can be broken off, you'll hit your shins on it, and the other thing is this looks a lot like a cheap factory tow hook, and you don't really want to drive around on the street with this all the time. So we're not going to use this. Now, this is a fantastic $15 imported tow hook. So this tow hook looks perfect, nicely presented in a cheap cardboard box. It has a rough approximation of the Volkswagen threads that we'll need to put it in our bumper, and it folds out of the way and looks kind of cool, which means that we don't have to take it on and off every track day, and we're not going to hit our shins on it or bash up other cars. So what's the issue? The issue is that this tow hook only weighs a few grams because it is entirely aluminum, and I don't just mean that this is aluminum, I mean the threads and the shaft and everything is aluminum. Now, that's a problem because these explode if you actually try and tow your car with them. This is just an ornament for your front bumper and not something you can actually go on track with. In fact, I think I could break this in half with a vise and just like a cheap hammer. Let's go ahead and try. Now, I'm not going to use my nice shiny Volkswagen. Instead, I'm going to use our Grassroots Motorsports tow hook tester here to see if we can spark one. So I'll start with a stock Volkswagen tow hook. I'm going to grab it right at the base there, cinch it down. This is not a particularly strong or sturdy vise or anything. Oh, and I'll just give it a hit with our tester. Oh, that wasn't that hard of a hit. I'd call that lightly buried in the gravel trap at Road Atlanta, and we managed to pull the car out. So let's go with this fantastic Amazon tow hook here. So go ahead and clamp it down at the same way. Now, I'm not clamping on the threads because I don't think that would be really fair, and I don't think I'll need to. And the cool thing about this is you can index it to fit your car. So I'll go ahead and just tighten that down here. Got my handy dandy adjustable wrench. Okay, and now let's give it the same hit here. I honestly thought that was going to take more than one hit, but as you can see, that wasn't that strong, and you can see it broke right at the aluminum thread there, kind of where I thought it would. So, moral of the story, probably not worth $15. Definitely not a good idea to put on track on your car. So what's the best of both worlds? We think it's this 034 Motorsports stainless steel tow hook. Now, this is about 150 bucks, so it's not free, but wow is it sturdy. And it also has the correct threads cut in to actually match the stock design here. Now, if you look at the $15 Amazon tow hook, see, it kind of has the threads, but not really. We would never trust this to actually pull a car. So the stainless steel tow hook, 150 bucks. It is 100% stainless steel, which means it should actually last if you try and pull a car out of a gravel trap with it. And it also folds out of the way, and it also looks quite nice if we do say so ourselves. So, how do you tell the difference between a cheap tow hook that will break when you try to use it and a good tow hook that will actually pull you out of that gravel pit? There's a few ways to do so. First of all, buy from a reputable vendor. That name I couldn't pronounce on Amazon is not going to sell a good tow hook unless you get real lucky. That $15 price point is also a warning sign. You just can't make something custom fit to a specific chassis strong enough to tow the car and sell it for $15. The other way to tell is weight. So I have our little shipping scale here, and as you can see, the Air weighs 0 ounces, and the cheap tow hook weighs, looks like about 9 ounces. That's because it's all aluminum. Now, the stock tow hook weighs 17 ounces, and the 034 Motorsport part weighs, looks like right about 25 ounces. So this is one area of the car we're happy to spend the extra pound versus this tow hook, because you kind of need the strength and the structure to be able to actually pull your car. So we talked about price. Buy from a reputable vendor too. 034 Motorsport actually takes their cars to the track and tests them. You can read reviews. You can see that other people have towed their cars with these and not had them explode. This one, the reviews were all 1 stars, and it basically promised it would let our car roll back off the truck down the hill and into a ravine if we used it. That's a little bit of advice on tow hooks. We'll be putting this one on the front of our car and leaving it forever. Then finally, we'll take a look at our wheels and tires. We want to make sure that our tires have good tread. We'll make sure pressures are correct, that the wheels are actually attached to the car properly. And while we have them off, we're inspecting hardware usually, we will take a look at brakes. You always want to make sure that you have enough brake pad, the right brake pad, and everything is moving smoothly, you're not getting uneven wear or something like that. Okay, track prep is done. Time to throw the helmet in the car, head to the racetrack, and see what it does. Everybody knows that German cars are terrible, and it's because they have wheel bolts. Let's fix that. This GTI, like most modern German cars, even back to E30s and older BMWs, has wheel bolts, which from a manufacturing optimization point of view, they make a ton of sense. Instead of having to install a lug stud, then a lug nut, the assembly line workers just put 1 bolt in that holds the wheel on. But for somebody like me who has the wheels on and off almost every weekend going to the racetrack, these are horrible because A, the threads wear out, that's a pain in the butt, and B, the wheel just falls in your lap as soon as you take the last wheel bolt out. So we've got a $175 034 Motorsport lug stud conversion, and these basically thread in and place the wheel bolts, and then the car has lug nuts like a normal car again. So we're going to go ahead and install those today and make every single tire change much easier in the future. Okay, so what sort of advanced tools and machines do you need to convert to lug studs? Not much actually, just 2 19mm wrenches and some blue Loctite to hold them in place. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is, because this car has anti-seize on it, Loctite won't stick to anti-seize, so I'm going to just give it a nice healthy dose of brake clean to kind of clean that anti-seize out and give the Loctite a nice clean surface to bond to. This car's fairly new, the threads are clean and fresh and look fine. If you have an older car or something that's got boogered up holes, something like that, it might make sense to run a thread chaser through and make sure you have nice clean threads for these lug studs to bottom in. But I'm not that worried about this on this car. Next up, I'm going to get a stud here, and I'm just going to put just a dollop of Loctite on here. And note, I'm using 243, which is blue. This doesn't really need to be like green or red or any kind of super high strength thread locker, just enough to keep them from unthreading when you take the lugs off. I'm going to start these hand tight, and then go ahead and take 2 nuts and just basically double nut them. And you don't have to torque these to 90 foot-pounds or anything crazy like you would when you're attaching a wheel, because again, these will tighten up when you put the wheel on. A couple different recommendations from different companies, but for the most part you want to hit maybe 10-20 foot-pounds, just nothing crazy at all here. Got 2 wrenches, just kind of double nut to lock, and then you can go ahead and tighten this up. there we go. Break the lug nuts loose. And that stud is installed. So now we just repeat that process 4 more times for this corner of the car, and we'll be all set. Okay, all set. Now we have lug studs just like every other real car sold in America. What a concept. Anyway, lug studs are installed. It's going to be much easier to put the wheels and tires back on. Cool thing to talk about, we got 65 millimeter studs, which are slightly extended, and that's just because we don't know exactly what wheels or spacers we might end up running on the car, and we like that flexibility of having some additional threads. Now we also went with bullnose studs, and that means just this unthreaded little tapered part at the front. And that makes it way easier to start the lug nuts. You can basically just throw them on and start spinning, and they catch instead of having to make sure they're perfectly started. And again, that just helps when you're rotating tires at the track. Make sure you don't cross thread anything and into your day early. 1 wheel down, 3 to go. We're going to finish the rest off camera and then hit the track. So why are we working on suspension today? What problems are we trying to solve? So we took the car to the track stock first, and after 58 laps across a couple different days at the Florida International Rally and Motorsport Park, we noticed a trend, and the trend was it absolutely murders front tires. In stock form, a GTI is very camber limited up front, like a lot of stock front-wheel drive McPherson strut cars. And to make it even worse, you can't actually adjust the camber in stock form. You're stuck at about negative 0.8 degrees, which is not nearly enough for what we're trying to do with the car. So what do we mean when we say there isn't enough negative camber? In the simplest terms, it means that the tire is leaned over like this on the outside of a corner, dragging its outside edge along the track instead of using the entire tread surface to help turn the car and put power down and turn. So by leaning the tire over more like this when the car is parked in a garage, our hope is that when the car is actually on track, the tread will be back flat on the ground due to dynamic camber change and body roll. So what we're basically trying to do is stop the car from grinding off the outside edge of the tire and focus all that energy more evenly across the face of the tire. But there is actually another tuning tool we can use to help our GTI's chassis, and that's caster. So I'm going to bring in a prop to talk about this, but basically caster is how far back that pivot, the steering pivot, is leaned back. I get that doesn't make much sense. Let me go get my prop and we'll talk more about it. This is my bike, and what we have here is basically a McPherson strut front suspension if you ignore a couple links and make a couple logical leaps, but this will make sense in a minute. So we talked about static negative camber, which is basically just leaning the bike over more. And as you can see, tires leaned over more, that's static negative camber, that's good. But we have another way we can add more negative camber when we're in a corner on track, and that is caster. And caster isn't about which way the bike is leaned over. Caster actually refers to this angle. Now I'd call it the head tube angle on a bicycle. On a car we call it caster, and it's basically how far reclined the axis of the steering pivot is. So why does this matter on track? Why does this matter for negative camber? So it has 2 positive benefits having more caster on a track car. First of all, it has a centering effect just like a shopping cart or a bicycle. This angle is why you can ride a bike with no hands. And what it also does is when your bike is perfectly upright and you steer, see this? This all of a sudden is negative camber, and that comes from that head tube angle or from that caster in a car. So here's a tool we can use on track. We can actually add more caster, and I'll simulate that just by dropping the back of the bicycle down a little bit. Now, when we turn, we have more negative camber. So what we're going to do is put camber and caster plates on the GTI, one part that actually adds more negative camber and adds more caster to the car, which should make much more dynamic camber when you're in the middle of a corner. Dynamic meaning what's actually on track with you. Okay, now that we've got everything apart, it's a little easier to show the differences between the camber caster plate and the stock parts here. So this is the stock top hat. As you can see, the top of the strut goes right through the middle of the strut tower, and that's how Volkswagen intended it. That's, again, about 0.8 degrees of negative camber. So to add 1.5 degrees of negative camber and 1 degree of caster, you just move that top of the strut in towards the middle of the car, and you can see that right here on the 034 Motorsports piece here. So again, basically the same design, rubber block, except there's more aluminum here, obviously. But you can see that the strut is moved in and back. So again, moving it in adds negative camber, and then moving it back adds caster. So pretty easy to see the differences here with them both on the bench. Again, pretty much the same underneath, just moved over a little bit. So we're going to put this back on the strut and put it in the car. So Let's talk about why we don't have a brand new strut sitting here ready to go on the car, why we're going to stick with the OEM shocks, or struts technically. The reason is we were told not to. A couple different Volkswagen experts we talked to said that for a slightly lower, slightly stiffer spring, which is what we're doing here, there isn't really much to be gained by going away from the stock struts, especially on a car like ours that only has about 20,000 miles on it. So, would we normally do that? Absolutely not. But in this case, we're going to see what the expert advice, how it actually works, how it performs on track, how it is on the street, and we might find ourselves replacing these shocks later, or we might decide that it's totally adequate the way it is and save some money here. So let's talk money. The set of sport springs we're going to install is about 20% stiffer, and it's about $260 or $265. So a pretty darn cost-effective upgrade for a car that should make it look better and should, more importantly, make it handle better and be more fun to drive on track. The camber plates and the upper strut bearings are a little more expensive. These are about $50 a piece, these strut bearings. You might not need to change them, but we always try to order them when we're going to have the car apart, just because it would be a pain to put it back together and then have a real noisy strut the next day. These camber caster plates are sold in a pair with fresh hardware, and they're right about $373, I think. So all in, far under $1,000 for the suspension upgrades here, and should make the car way, way, way more fun to drive. You also might be wondering why we're not doing coilovers, and again, it just kind of isn't the mission of this car. This is a daily driver. The primary goal is to keep it a fun, comfortable street car, and it's kind of rare to find that in a coilover kit, especially a coilover kit at this sub-$1,000 price point. So generally you have to make a lot of concessions with NVH or tuning or actually something tailored for the application at that price range, and we just didn't want to get into that with this car and ruin its street manners. So we're going to do just some alignment tweaks and some stiffer springs and see how it works. Okay, we finished up the front suspension. We've got camber plates and springs. Now we need to put the rear sport springs in. Fortunately, that's pretty easy. It's basically 2 bolts, pull the arm down, put the new spring in. So we'll get to work. And while we were in there, we also upgraded the pads and rotors on the car to a more track-oriented compound and to a little better rotor from a 034 Motorsport. We got the suspension button back up, so we're going to put it back down on the ground and torque everything. Before we do, though, I want to talk a little bit about wheels and tires, because we're not going to be putting the stock wheels back on the car at the end of this. Okay, we're ditching the stock 18 by 7.5 inch wide wheels and going with these new forged wheels from Titan 7. Now, these are an 18 by 8.5 inch wide wheel with I think a 44 offset, something like that. So this wheel and tire combo is basically as much as you can fit on a street-driven GTI with absolutely no worries about any kind of rubbing or issues at all. It's kind of conservative. The stance guys will put way more tire on than we would, but for how we use the car, it's a daily driver that goes to the track once a month. We think that this is a pretty nice fit. So we went an inch wider, and we also went with a forged wheel. So what are the benefits of a forged wheel versus a flow-formed wheel or a cast wheel, something like that? Primary strength. They are a little more expensive, but they're also far stronger, and that lets them be far lighter. So this wheel and tire combo, despite being much wider than the stock setup, is actually a pound lighter, and most of that is due to these Titan 7 wheels. We're also big fans of forged wheels for street cars because street cars abuse their wheels a fair bit. Not only are we bouncing this car off curbs on track and that sort of thing, but we're hitting potholes every day. We're hitting driveways and curbs and that kind of thing. So it's nice having the security of a forged wheel and not constantly worrying about bending an ultra lightweight track wheel. So the other cool thing about these Titan 7 wheels is they've got some fairly intricate machining details. So all of the spokes are kind of that I-beam style, so there's extra material removed there. And then if you look at the back of the wheel, there's even more material removed from these areas too. So that makes these wheels pretty light. Again, we lost a pound somehow, even though we went to way wider wheels and tires. We've been pretty happy with them so far. Okay, so we talked wheels, let's talk tires. And you might be surprised that there isn't a Super 200 or a, what are they called, Extreme Performance Summer tire on the car. So again, this is a daily driven car. It's driven year-round in Florida, so we don't have to deal with snow, but we do have to deal with quite a lot of rain. So we actually went with a Max Performance Summer tire. In this case, we picked the Continental Extreme Contact Sport 02. So this is not a 200 treadwear tire. This is actually a 340 treadwear tire. So is it slower than the Super 200s that are so popular these days, like an AO52 or an RT660, something like that? Yes, it's slower, but not by much. We actually picked this tire after a lot of consultation with our tire guide. We'll put a link in the description, but we've tested pretty much every sports car tire you could ever think of, and we know how they perform. And we know that this one, though it is slightly slower on track than some of the fastest 200 treadwear tires, it is so much better day to day. It's not noisy, it wears fairly evenly, it's great in the wet, actually one of the best wet weather tires we've ever tested. So we think it's a perfect compromise for this car, and we think that it'll be great on the street without having to change tires when we go to the racetrack. So that's our wheel and tire setup. We're going to throw it on the car and we're going to go test it at the track. So that should do it for today's work session in the garage. We've got fresh suspension on our GTI, we've got new wheels and tires. The only thing left to do is test them all. So please make sure you like and subscribe, and until next time, we'll see you at the track. Good morning from the Grid Life Festival Tour. We are here at Carolina Motorsports Park, and we're about to take our Project Mk7 GTI out on track. So we've signed up for a day of HPDE with Grid Life, high performance driver education. We're going to be in the advanced group. There's no scoring here, there's no timers. Our only goal is to have fun and put track laps on our street car. Before we can go on track though, we have to do a couple more things to the car, so I'll meet you in the shop. Okay, we're back in the shop. We've got our Mk7 GTI in the bay here, and we're going to be working on it again, trying to get it ready for the track. So today we're going to fix the car's PCV system. Now, that's positive crankcase ventilation. It basically means the system that deals with the oil fumes from the inside of the engine. And our car has a problem. It's fine on the street, but on track it's currently burning oil and making big oil clouds, which is almost getting us black flagged and definitely annoying having to keep putting more oil in the car. So we're going to go ahead and install about a $700 034 Motorsport Stage 2 PCV system upgrade catch can, a couple different parts designed to make these cars' oiling systems sturdier for track use, basically. So these cars are known for having oil burning issues on track. There's a factory air oil separator built into the valve cover that then goes to the intake tract, and it has a tendency to allow just raw oil to go right over the little baffle and into the intake. Now, why don't we want oil going into the intake of our car? Couple of reasons. First of all, it uses up all the oil in the car, which is not great. So we would like to keep more of the oil back in the crankcase where it belongs. The second issue is this is a direct injected car, and it already has issues with dirty valves and carbon buildup. We don't want to put even more contaminants through the intake tract like the oil we're burning. So in theory, this 034 Motorsport kit will prevent more oil from leaving the engine and catch what oil does leave the engine, making a cleaner intake air charge. Okay, so the first step to install the catch can doesn't actually have anything to do with the catch can. We have to replace the PCV valve. So on a stock GTI, it's this giant hunk of plastic on top of the valve cover here. So we're going to replace it with this really nice hunk of builded aluminum from 034. That is basically an upgraded PCV valve that should handle the stress of track use much better. So we're going to take some wiring out of the way, pull that factory piece out, bolt this down, and then go from there. Okay, it's about an hour later and our car has a new catch can. So we replaced the PCV valve, we added new hoses to the 034 Motorsport catch can, and we should be ready to go back to the track. So we're going to go to CMP, we're going to see how it does and how much oil we burn this time, and we'll go from there. Okay, we just came off track at CMP, and this is actually the first time we've been back to a racetrack since we changed the suspension, the brakes, and a couple other little things on our GTI. Now, is it faster? Absolutely. We'll go back to the firm soon and figure out exactly how much time we picked up, but we managed a 150 right off the trailer, or well, right off the highway actually here at CMP, and that's pretty darn respectable for a car on 340 treadwear tires. It was easy to drive, it was comfortable, it was neutral, plenty of power with that 034 tune, but there are still some things to fix. It cooks the brakes. We kind of saw that coming with the street-focused pad and without any additional brake ducting, and it's it's still kind of soft and kind of heavy like a street car, especially a modern front-wheel drive, high-horsepower street car would be. So we have some things to work on. Overall, though, pretty darn good compromise. We drove to dinner comfortably last night, and then we went and held our own in an HPDE session today. One other thing to note, the back of the car is clean. It used to always be covered in oil at the end of a track day, so we're going to call that catch can installation a success, and we're pretty happy to not be getting oil all over our camping gears. We know all these modifications made the car fun on CMP, but we don't actually know how much faster they made it because our official test track is the Florida International Rally and Motorsport Park. So we're going to drive home, then we're going to go to the firm. You'll see that in the next video. Please make sure you like and subscribe. So It's time to figure out if we actually made the car faster, so we went to our official test track, the Florida International Rally and Motorsport Park, to see what kind of time it lays down. We've been going there constantly with the GTI throughout the modifications, trying to figure out if we're making it better or worse, and the news was really, really good after the latest round. We dropped more than 5 seconds a lap from our previous personal best with the car. So today I wanted to take a little bit of a deep dive into the data, talk about why the car is faster, where it's faster, and where we still might have room for improvement going forward. One other thing I wanted to address, did we ruin the car, or at least waste a day's worth of work by pairing a set of aftermarket lowering springs with these stock shocks? No, honestly, not that bad at all. Both myself and JG Pasterjak, who does a lot of our test driving, drove the car, and we both kind of reached the same conclusion. Does the car have the finest shocks ever made? No, I prefer the MCSs on my 350Z. But for stock shocks, pretty darn good, and neither of us came away from our drive in the car saying the shocks are the weak point. So ultimately, I think we got away with it. We saved somewhere around $1,000, which is pretty nice. And we don't have any immediate plans to change the shocks. They're just not what's holding the car back right now. So we're going to call this experiment a success, at least for this use case. So I mentioned we loaded a 034 Motorsport tune into the car. Should, in theory, bump our power output to about 300 horsepower, but we haven't been to a dyno yet. We'll get there next. We also tuned the car's transmission. Remember, our car is not a 6-speed manual. It is a 6-speed twin-clutch DSG transmission. And we loaded a tune for a couple reasons. First of all, it's got a very annoying factory kickdown switch that will try and downshift at the worst possible time at the firm coming out of that hairpin. So tuning it eliminates that and makes the car a lot less labor intensive to drive. You don't have to remember the kickdown in the back of your mind. But the tune also speeds shifts and increased line pressure, so in theory it makes the car shift faster and it makes the transmission more reliable on track. And we loved it. Lightning fast shifts that happened exactly when we wanted. And it also raised the rev limiter, which means we no longer have to shift from third to fourth after the kink. We can just ride it out in third all the way to, I think, 7,200 RPM is the new red line. But that saved us at least a little bit of time there. So in this car, because it's a dual-purpose car, it's my daily driver and my track car, we don't have some dedicated data system. We don't have a digital dash in it or anything. Instead, we've been using a Garmin Catalyst for everything. It's kind of a little driving coach that also has a really powerful data analysis feature. So I'm going to be going through the 2 best laps before the modifications and after the modifications on the Garmin Catalyst app today. So let's dive into it. Okay, so here I've got 2 laps pulled up, one from November right after we got the car, basically our baseline, and then one from a couple weeks ago after the modifications. So as you can see, we ran a 127.6 second lap earlier, and now the car is down to a 122.44 second lap. So let me start off by saying that a 127.6 was nothing to be ashamed of. That's right where a stock Mk7 GTI should be. It's right in line with that generation of hot hatches based on our testing with new cars. But a 122.4 kind of catapults our GTI into some pretty hallowed ground. I mean, we're right on par with cars like Civic Type R, Golf R on Michelin Pilot Sports, some pretty serious cars that cost a bunch more money than we have into our GTI. So let's talk about where those 5 seconds came from and how our modifications contributed to this. And I'll start by just going through that kind of turn 2-3 complex here. And as you can see, that's where our first big gap starts to open up between old and new on the car. And if I zoom into the data here a little bit, the primary reason for this is just higher cornering speeds. And I'm going to chalk that up to front camber and tires. So basically, we don't have to brake nearly as hard for that turn 2, kind of that off-camber turn. And then when we're leaving it here, when we're leaving that 2-3 complex, you can see that difference in the speed growth in the acceleration curve, basically, getting onto that little straight before the kink. And that is all power. So that's from the tune. That's a little bit due to those tires, those Continental tires, helping to put the power down. But you can see the car really accelerates much faster going onto the straight. Now the next part I'll talk about is kind of the kink. I think it's technically turn 4 at the firm. And you can see we didn't have to slow nearly as much. So we kept a minimum speed that was somewhere around 6 miles an hour faster than the car was stock. And that is just tires and camber, basically. The car was way more stable, it understeered way less, we didn't have to slow down nearly as much to go through that corner. So the next thing I want to talk about is turns 5 and 6, which is kind of 2 hard right-handers with a tiny straight in between them. And here you can really see the modifications shine. So we're carrying way more speed through 5, we didn't have to brake nearly as hard, And then we got up to an 11-mile-an-hour speed differential faster going into 6 than we did before. And that's just power and traction, basically. The car's faster, the car's going through corners faster. That's great. And then you can also see, going into 6, the car is braking harder. So our deceleration curve is much sharper than it was before, which is just fantastic. Again, more power going into the S's, and you can see just more power, more traction. Again, we're doing great through the S's there. Oddly enough, we didn't pick up as much time on the back straight. That might be due to heat soak, which we'll talk about a little more later. And again, faster through turn 10 and all the way to a lap time that is 5.18 seconds faster than the car was stock. So this is fantastic work. It's also much nicer to drive. The understeer issue is still there, but it's much, much better than it was before. So we're real happy. But we should talk about opportunities, and right now the car's biggest opportunity, or the biggest weakness I should say, is heat management. So first of all, brakes. We did manage to get to brake fade with those Pageant Street Plus pads. We're putting too much heat into the braking system thanks to these stickier tires. And we did actually manage to fix that right at the track. So I went ahead and 3D printed some Mk7 GTI brake cooling deflectors. We'll put a link to the file in the description. But basically, a random person on the internet uploaded this file that you could 3D print and clip onto your control arms. And in theory, it funnels air into the front brakes to help cool them. We found that it worked. We noticed something like a 30-degree temperature difference with versus without the deflectors, and that seemed to fix our fade issue and let us do back-to-back-to-back hot laps on track reliably. So that's awesome. We fixed heat management on the brakes. But the car still has heat management issues with the drivetrain. We were only able to do about 3 laps at full pace before we noticed the data logs starting to show the car slowing down out of corners and ultimately making less power. And we know from talking to the experts at 034 Motorsport that these cars are pretty notorious for high intake temps because of a weak factory intercooler, especially in Florida heat like we have. So we're going to be doing some more precise logging, trying to figure out if it is actually intake temps causing it, whether the car is pulling boost or timing or both, and maybe throw some more parts at the car to try and fix that and keep it making full power longer. Other than that, the car still understeers. It's a heavy front-wheel drive, high horsepower car, or relatively high horsepower car. So we're going to be doing some more work in that area too. We're going to put a bigger rear sway bar on the car to help that understeer at turn-in, and then we're also going to be playing with rear toe settings a fair bit to try and help the car rotate mid-corner and ultimately help it go faster. So we're going to be doing some more modifications. We're going to be changing some more things in the car, and we're going to be testing it every step of the way. So if you want to see how we do, please make sure you like and subscribe. Until next time, we'll see you at the track. Okay, we're back in the garage working on our Mk7 Volkswagen GTI project car, and today we're going to be putting a bigger rear sway bar on the car. Now, before we do that though, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what changing the size of a sway bar on a car can do and why it's going to, at least theoretically, help our GTI on track. And while most of this video is going to deal with sway bars in the context of a front-wheel drive track car, it's fairly universal advice that you can apply to any car. So before we talk about the sway bar on our GTI though, I wanted to talk about this Miata antenna, which yes, it's off our old Lemons car, but it's just a piece of spring steel, and it's a good way to start talking about how sway bars work. So I'll put this in the vise here, grab the other end with a pair of vice grips here, and all I want to illustrate here is that this is just a big spring. When you twist it, it bounces back, just like a coil spring on the car, except it's working rotationally here, and it springs back. So why does this matter? Because an anti-roll bar is basically just a big spring. Let's take that to the next logical leap and go ahead and bend it into the shape of a basic sway bar. And I went ahead and did that here. So as you can see, we have a straight part, and then we have 2 levers on each end. So I'll turn it so you can see it, and when you twist one lever, it tries to spring back here. So we've gotten the basic shape of a sway bar in a car. Let's go ahead and get sway bar bushings now. And I've just got 2 little nuts here, so I can go ahead and slip them on like this. And now we have an easy way for our sway bar to rotate. So I can put that in the vise. So now that I've installed kind of our little Miata antenna sway bar onto the bench here, you can really start to see how it works in a car. So we still have our 2 levers, we still have the actual springy part of the bar, and when you move one up or down, see, you can twist and you're getting that same spring action. So why do we put these on cars? What does this do for suspension? So if you connect each side of the sway bar to the suspension, the spring rate is basically 0 when both wheels are moving at the same time. But when one wheel tries to move while the other doesn't, it creates resistance. So we call this roll resistance in a car. And basically, a sway bar is one of the tuning tools in a suspension system to change the roll resistance at each end. So what's the benefit of having this third spring in the rear suspension that's only acting on body roll? Couple different reasons to do this. First of all, it lets you change roll resistance independently of spring rate. So where you might optimize spring rate to help put power down or to go over bumps in the road, this is just another tuning tool to make a car faster or more comfortable. Okay, so I've talked about my little bench test sway bar that's just a big square here. How do we actually package that into a car? And that's when you start to get sway bars like this front bar from 034 Motorsport, designed to fit our GTI. And you can see it's got a couple of extra little bins in there just to go around different parts of the car. But even though this is bent and has some extra, kind of features, it's still basically a straight bar with two levers on each end, and it will act like that. Next, I want to talk about what it does to the car and what specifically going bigger in the rear sway bar can do to a front-wheel drive car. So the first thing it's going to do to our GTI is it's going to help control body roll. Body roll is basically when the body of a car leans over in a corner. Everybody's felt it when they've taken a corner at any speed. Body roll is not really something you want on a racetrack normally because body roll leads to dynamic camber change, especially on our GTI. So dynamic camber change is basically a gain or loss of negative camber when a suspension cycles through its range of motion, and we want to lose as little negative camber as possible on our GTI, especially up front with the struts. So by putting a stiffer rear sway bar on our GTI, it should reduce body roll, which should reduce dynamic negative camber loss, which should give the tires more traction to work with. But that's not the main reason we're doing it. Sure, it controls body roll, which is nice. We're actually trying to increase the rear roll stiffness in the back of our GTI. Why do you want to increase rear roll stiffness on a track car, especially a front-wheel drive track car? Because it understeers like a pig right now. Those camber plates we put up front definitely helped. It does have more front grip, but the car is still kind of an understeering, nose-heavy car. So we would like the car to handle more neutrally or even bias towards oversteer to help it turn in and to help keep that front end from washing out on every corner. So increasing the rear roll stiffness can be a good tool to do that. Roll stiffness changes at one end of the car are a way to shift the balance of load in a corner between the front and rear. So for our GTI, by increasing the rear roll stiffness, we should be able to force the rear of the car to take more of the cornering load, which forces the front of the car to take less of the cornering load. In theory, that biases it more towards oversteer than towards understeer and should help it handle better. Let's talk a little bit more about the parts that surround a sway bar, or at least that should whenever you install one on your car. As you can see here on my little Miata antenna model again, it has absolutely no drag from the sway bar bushings, these two nuts here. And that's what you want. You want the sway bar to be able to float around completely free of any resistance or binding when it's in the car, when it's not connected to the suspension. That's not usually what happens with stock bushings. They're rubber, they tend to bind, they're not lubricated that well. So we're gonna go ahead and put a set of 034 Motorsport urethane rear sway bar bushings on the car. And these are greasable. They're also a little stiffer. So in theory, these should let the sway bar move up and down without any binding or extra spring rate introduced. And the urethane should mean that the entire bar twists around less and has less deflection. Again, we're trying to isolate all of the force into that sprung part of the bar to keep things predictable. Oh, we're also going to be putting on adjustable end links. End links connect the sway bar to the suspension. These are basically just a solid rod that translates motion from the wheel into motion at the sway bar. We put adjustable end links on wherever possible because you don't want the sway bar to be pushing on the suspension when it's just at static ride height at rest when both wheels are in the same spot. And by being able to adjust the length of these individually, we can make sure that the sway bar isn't biased towards one side of the car or another, or starting to press on the suspension when the car is just parked. These are also a handy tool you can use sometimes when you're corner weighting, that sort of thing, but that's pretty advanced. I'm not going to get into that on this project. I should talk about the downsides, and the downsides are a loss of compliance. So anytime you're increasing spring rates anywhere in a suspension, you are reducing the amount of compliance in the car and the ability of the tire to press itself over little bumps and changes in the asphalt, that sort of thing. So we think the upsides drastically outweigh the downsides here. We think that this is going to make the car faster. We don't think it's going to have really any effect on its daily driver, comfort, potential, etc. But it's worth noting that anytime you increase spring rate, you reduce compliance. So the only thing left to do is put it on and go to the racetrack. So if you like this video, please make sure you like and subscribe. Until next time, I'll see you at the track. Over the past year, we have gotten our Mk7 GTI project car fast and consistent on track. It is just a remarkable track car and we've really enjoyed running it. One problem though, it's only fast and consistent for a couple laps before it heat soaks and pulls power in the straights. Last time we were in the shop, we spent almost a full day actually installing a bigger intercooler from 034 Motorsport. Wasn't the easiest job we've ever done, but we did do it with basic hand tools and a lift, of course, but you could do it on the ground pretty easily. Not that hard of a job, and everything fit nicely, it bolted right up. After that, we went back to the firm to see if it worked. So we put our V-Box Motorsport HD light into the car, and now I'm going to review the data and see if our bigger intercooler is actually helping us stay more consistent on track. So I'm looking at our data, and I've got it opened up here in V-Box's analysis suite called Circuit Tools. So over here on the left, you can see that we're comparing our second lap of the session against our seventh lap of the session. Now these times are slightly different, maybe half a second or so off of where the GTI normally runs. That's just due to different track conditions and also because we're running a little different tire than usual. We were doing some confidential tire testing. We'll share results from that at a later date. But for now, just know that the car was on a 200 treadwear tire, roughly equivalent to the Continentals we've been running. So I'm going to compare two big things here. Acceleration curve from the first lap and acceleration curve from the last lap. So if we look down here to the speed in miles per hour, I can zoom in a little bit. And you'll see that the second lap is this blue data trace and the seventh lap is this red data trace. And here's a nice acceleration curve as we're coming on to the smaller straight at the firm. And as you can see here, the two cars are neck and neck. I mean, it's a dead heat. Whereas before we used to see pretty drastic power loss and pretty drastically slower speeds on the straights of the firm. So pretty cool here that the intercooler already seems to be working and seems to be buying us time. So we'll go through kind of the high-speed kink here, slight slowdown, and then again we're back on the gas. And you can see right around here, lap 7 is actually accelerates slightly faster than the lap 2 here. Pretty much a dead heat. Again, going into kind of the slower speed portion of the track as we get towards the S's. You know, slightly different driving, slightly different laps here, so we're not talking about cornering speeds or the raw time as much. Just want to talk about the acceleration curves. So I can scroll over to the right here a little bit. So right here, going through the S's, go through the slow speed hairpin at the turn. This is the slowest part of at the firm, the slowest part of the track. Then we have the smaller back straight. Again, you can see, actually it looks like lap 7 is pulling at a slightly higher pace than lap 2. So again, that could be driving or tires or something, but the important thing to note is that the car is just not pulling power at all. It is just wickedly consistent. This is actually one of the highest consequence corners on the firm. This is the big sweeper before the front straight. And I want you to look at these two curves going onto the front straight. Now, you can see on lap 2, we were slightly off in that sweeper, so we exited it without as much speed as we should have had. But because the two lines are at different points, you can see how similar the curves are. I mean, basically perfectly identical acceleration on this the second lap and the seventh lap. So just fantastic illustration of why this bigger intercooler from 034 Motorsport kind of fixed our car's Achilles heel. I mean, it no longer heat soaks. We can do as many laps as we want in a row without having issues. So that's a success. We have more to do with the GTI. We have more, like I said, more tires to test. We have more suspension modifications to make, but we have solved the heat management issue and it can now do as many laps as we want without pulling power. That's a success. If you want to see what else we've done to the GTI, we've got a whole playlist linked below with every video on the car. And if you want to learn more, visit our website at grassrootsmotorsports.com. Until next time, we'll see you at the track. Okay, so today we're back in the shop, again working on our project Mk7 GTI, and we're going to deal with one of the most common issues on a modern Volkswagen or any modern direct injected car, and that is gunk on the valves. So unlike a traditional port injected car where fuel washes carbon deposits off of the intake valves, direct injected cars like these don't have any way to really clean their valves, which means that they get dirty. So today we're going to be walnut blasting the car. I already spent an hour or so taking the intake manifold off so we could actually see the valves, and we could see they're pretty darn gross. So how did we know the valves were dirty on our GTI? Well, the first sign was actually kind of a rough idle and an intermittent check engine light for a misfire, a couple different codes. And after talking to a couple experts between the mileage on the car, about 40,000 miles now, and the symptoms, we figured it was a pretty good bet the valves were filthy. And now that we've pulled the intake manifold, we can say that yes, they are. They're completely covered in crap. So we think cleaning these up is going to help the car run better, and we'll do spark plugs while we're in here since we have to pull them out anyway. So this is also a fantastic time to talk about the sponsor of today's video, 034 Motorsport. So throughout this project, we've been putting 034 parts on all kinds of different areas of this car. We've got a PCV system here, we've got their camber plates, their sway bars, their springs, a couple other odds and ends, and every single part they make has been well made, well thought out, and kind of just help this car be faster on track without completely ruining its street manners. They've also kind of thought of everything, so when we told them we were doing the valves, they said, oh yeah, we have a product for that. So just to show that they know these cars really, really well, the company is actually run by enthusiasts, they have these cars on staff, and they really kind of thought of everything and make a part for pretty much every issue these cars have. So if you want to support us and support 034 Motorsports, you can check out their website, the link in the description. So I know how to pull an intake manifold, but I don't actually know how to do walnut blasting. I've never done it before, I don't have the equipment or anything. So instead, Jesse Spiker of Spiker Motorsports is gonna come over and do it for us. Now, Jesse's a longtime friend, he runs a race shop a couple miles away from us, and he really knows his stuff when it comes to modern cars like this. So we're gonna hand it over to Jesse and see how it goes. Okay, so as promised, we're here with Jesse Spiker of Spiker Motorsports, and Jesse actually knows what he's doing, unlike us. So he brought his walnut blasting gear, he brought his expertise, and Jesse, what are you gonna do?
Well, basically we have a pressurized can with walnut shells in it. You close the valves, you blast the back of the valves. While you're doing that, you shop vac everything out, cleans everything. So nice, quick, safe, reliable way to clean them, and we'll be done in about 15 minutes.
Perfect. And so why walnut shells instead of like sandblasting or something like that?
Well, since we're on the intake side of the motor, they're gonna get in the valves, which can potentially get sucked into the engine. Now we close the valves before we do this, so we're gonna shop back it all out and get as much out as we can. But in the event something goes in the engine, the walnut shells are gonna disappear before they damage anything. So the equipment that we're using today is actually available at Harbor Freight, as well as the walnut shell material. Don't exactly quote me on price, but I want to say
$99.99. I looked.
Okay, it's good. I believe I have less than $200 total into the abrasive, the equipment itself, and anything I modified to make it work how I wanted it to. All right, so the first step, basically, we're going to roll the engine over, make sure the valves are closed on the cylinder that we are currently working on, and then we're going to pressurize our walnut blasting apparatus and get to work.
So it's 15 minutes later, the intake valves on our GTI are now like absolutely spotless. So thank you, Jesse. That was, I mean, Absolutely. You got some walnut all over you, but that was quick and easy, pretty painless. Yeah, valves are clean. We're gonna button the car back up and see how it runs. Okay, you can probably tell we are doing class outside today because for once we are driving our GTI. We are not stuck in the shop anymore. Cleaning the intake valves seems to have fixed the problem. We don't have any more check engine light. We don't have any more rough idle. We are out and about enjoying the car again. So if you like this video, please make sure you like and subscribe. And until next time, we'll see you at the track. Does our Mk7 Volkswagen GTI actually make 300 horsepower like we've been claiming for a year now? Let's find out. It's dyno day. We're here at VMP Performance using their DynoJet dyno today, and we're finally going to figure out how much power our GTI actually makes. We think it's somewhere around 300 horsepower thanks to an intercooler, a cold air intake, and a tune by 034 Motorsport, but today we're finally going to find out. So we're going to run the car as is, as we've been tracking it for about a year, and then we're going to go ahead and flash the tune back to stock and see how much power it would make without the tune. Before I dig into the data though, I need to take a minute and thank the sponsor of today's video and our channel, 034 Motorsport. Oh, they make all sorts of parts for Volkswagens, just like ours. We've thrown most of their catalog at the GTI, and I can honestly say that everything I've used has been really well made, really well thought out, and kept its promises, including the tune we installed. So we tested the car exactly how we've been running it, with a tune, a cold air intake, and a front mount intercooler. And then we went ahead and put some boostain in the car. It's an octane booster you add to the fuel that can simulate the effects of race gas, and we wanted to see if higher octane would still help the car make more power. It's a really warm day, and we thought the car might be knock or boost limited. Then we went ahead and flashed the stock tune back onto the car. We've been running a 034 Motorsport Stage 1 tune designed for 93 octane pump gas, and we wanted to see what the car would do without that software tweak. I've got all three runs pulled up in my DynoJet software here, so let's go through the curves and see what the car was doing. Now before we dig into the data, I wanted to mention that we measured wheel horsepower on the dyno, and we're going to be discussing wheel horsepower and torque for the duration of this video. Now Volkswagen advertises crank horsepower, and when we say that our GTI makes 300 horsepower, we're going off of a claimed crank number from 034 Motorsport. Now they also publish wheel horsepower numbers. If you want to dig a little bit deeper into that crank horsepower versus wheel horsepower number and what 034 advertises, I'll go ahead and put a link in the description to view all the details of the tune. For now though, let's look at the wheel horsepower and torque numbers from our GTI. Okay, so here we're looking at the 3 runs from the dyno. The brown curve here is torque and horsepower for the car with the cold air intake, the intercooler, and a stock map. And then the red line here is the car with the 93 octane tune from 034 Motorsport. And then the yellow line here is that same setup except with a couple bottles of boost-tane thrown into the fuel tank, again to raise the octane of the fuel. So let's start with the stock curve here. We can see that in brown. Should be able to, there we go. And I can drag my pointer around here and actually see kind of the difference between the different curves at each point on the chart. And along the bottom axis here, you can see engine RPM to kind of give you an idea of where we're at in the car's rev range. So I wanted to start by pointing out kind of how much torque this car makes so early. We're at 246 foot-pounds bone stock at 2,450 RPM. That is one reason these are such good daily drivers. This is not a high-strung sports car. This is a torquey little commuter that, it's basically a perfectly flat 250 foot-pound torque curve all the way to 4,500, 5,000 RPM, somewhere around there. So I don't really know what else to say except this is what a modern direct-injected turbocharged powertrain looks like. It's pretty impressive, and it's one reason modern cars are so cool. So in stock form, the car made 258 foot-pounds of torque, peaking right about 3,700 RPM, that's right here. And it made 216 horsepower, peaking at 5,400 RPM. Again, that's right about here. This is a pretty clean, nice stock curve. Again, it makes torque early, it starts to run out of steam, and that's what it is, 216 horsepower. The car is rated at about 230 horsepower and 270 something foot-pounds, so these baseline numbers at the wheels look pretty darn close to what they should be. So now let's talk about the car as we've been racing it. Again, there are no hard part changes between these lines, only the difference of the 034 tune and slightly different fuel. So you can see this red line here. Basically, the car makes so much more torque down low in the rev range. It is amazing. A difference of about 50 foot-pounds at 3,000 RPM. And then the car keeps that increase all the way until way higher in the rev range too. You can also see the tune has raised our rev limiter almost 1,000 RPM. We previously had a limiter at about 6,100, and now it runs all the way to 7,000. This is awesome on track. Shifts are really quick with the DSG, but it's still nice to be able to hold gears longer. So the car on 93 octane pump gas made 260 horsepower and 310 foot-pounds of torque. So that's pretty darn impressive for a tune and a couple supporting modifications, basically. Now, I know the car has a big intercooler and a cold air intake, but we really don't think that those are affecting the car on the dyno. We think that the intercooler's effect is primarily in helping the car recover from all the heat it builds on track. We expect pretty similar numbers without any hard parts. So the 034 Motorsport tune promised 303 horsepower and 341 foot-pounds. And I would say that those numbers seem pretty close. We made slightly less power, if you use the same driveline loss formula from stock to the tune, but I would say we exceeded expectations in the torque number. So all in all, pretty darn close. I'm pretty happy with that purchase. Now though, let's talk about what happened when we raised the octane of the fuel. Again, we didn't even use real race gas, we just dumped a couple bottles of octane booster in. And as you can see, horsepower stayed the same. Both situations peaked right about 260 horsepower. But the torque was incredible. We picked up 16 foot-pounds of torque, something like 5%, and you can see it right in the difference between these two curves here. And that is really just the fuel letting the car run either more boost or more timing or both. And it's pretty cool to see the effect in real time. Now I should note that we didn't data log on these runs. We didn't track air-fuel ratios, we didn't track knock or boost, and the reason is we don't have the ability to modify this tune. So to a certain extent, ignorance is bliss, but we didn't see any value in the additional time and money of data logging a bunch of stuff that we couldn't change. So all in all, pretty darn impressive that this car we've been daily driving for over a year makes 326 foot-pounds, and pretty darn happy with it. So if you want to see everything we've done to our Mk7 GTI so far, I'll put a link to the playlist down below. If you like this video, please make sure you like and subscribe. Until next time, we'll see you at the track.
We bought a $20,000 used GTI from Carvana with the intent of making it as fast as modern performance cars. Did we do it? Well, absolutely yes. Should you do it? Well, let's see what the data says about how we got there. Hi folks, here at Grassroots Motorsports, we love our project cars, and one of the most satisfying things we do with our project cars is we take older, maybe 1, 2, 3 generation old vehicles, and we see if we can make them the equal or even better of whatever their modern equivalent in the marketplace is. And that was just the focus of our Mk7 Volkswagen GTI. It was a $20,000 used car out of a Carvana vending machine, and our intent with it was to see if we could bring it in line with modern performance small cars like the Honda Civic Type R and Subaru BRZs and GR Corollas and stuff like that, because those are cars that are selling for upwards of $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. And what could we do with our $20,000 GTI to give it the same level of performance? If you'd like to check out everything that we've done to this VW GTI to shave 8 seconds off of the lap time at our official test track, you can check out the playlist down below. One of the things you might notice in that playlist is a lot of the parts and a lot of the technology that we have sourced for this project came from 034 Motorsport. They are not only a partner in this project, they are the sponsor of today's video, and you can check out their full line of accessories, performance for your Volkswagen at their website. It is linked down in the description below as well. And now, back to the video. First off, let's talk about where that 120.73 stacks up sort of in general in the pantheon of cars that we've tested. And the answer is it's on the quick side. It puts it in league with stuff like the Honda Civic Type R. It puts it a couple seconds ahead of stuff like the Hyundai Elantra N and Veloster N. Puts it right up with stuff like the Volkswagen Golf R, Mustang Dark Horse, a lot of very cutting edge performance cars up in that low 120 area. But the VBox data is going to tell us exactly what it's doing on track, and maybe even how it could not only be the equal, but be the better of some of these modern performance cars as well. So let's take a look at some of the data traces. All right, so the first comparison we'll bring up here is going to be the blue trace. That will be the Toyota GR Corolla. That's going to be versus the red trace of the GTI here. And just looking over this trace, we can bring up our Delta trace here, which shows us exactly where the GTI is making up its time. And we see the first big area where it's pulling a gap on the Corolla is this tight right hand of turn 2 at the firm. Now this is an interesting corner. You can see it a little bit in the in-car here. You're cresting a rise. Yeah, look, I know it's Florida. Florida is very flat, but yes, we do have some pavement irregularities, and this is a corner that falls away right at the apex. So if you charge it too hard on the entry, you're going to push right off the back of this corner. And we see that the GTI is actually doing a little bit better job taking a later entry into the corner here. The GR Corolla, we see this speed trace dropping down here earlier. Minimum speed comes at an earlier point in the corner, and minimum speed for the VW comes at a later point in the corner. So the GR Corolla taking a little bit more of a point and shoot approach to this corner, whereas the GTI is using a little bit, better turn in, better stability in the early corner to get just a faster run at at the apex, and we see that we've got a big jump in our delta right here, where the GTI is picking up a good portion, picking up a couple of tenths right there, and holding on to it over the next segment. Now it's giving a little bit back right here. Let's see where this is. We see the VW start to give back some time here, and that is going to be primarily in turn 4, fast sweeping turn 4. So the GTI really liked this low speed corner. Did not like the high speed kink of turn 4 quite as much as the GR Corolla did, but did a really nice job accelerating out of turn 4. And in fact, almost out accelerating the GR Corolla. Now this GR Corolla is a 300 horsepower plus car, and the GTI did not certainly start out as a 300 plus horsepower car, but it is giving the GR Corolla the what for here on the acceleration curve, holding right with it down this next straightaway. And we see that where's the GTI start? Yeah, so they've almost pulled even here again after that superior run that the Corolla had through turn 4, and the GTI starts clawing back a little bit again in these slower corners, turn 5 and turn 6 here at the firm. GTI is clawing back a little bit of its time, slowly but surely. Gives a little bit back here through the early part of the S's. That tends to come down to shock compliance. How hard can you hit those curves, and how straight can you keep the car through that section there? And the GR Corolla seems to have won that battle there. But the GTI grabs a ton of it back in the slowest corner on track, that being the hairpin right here. We see the GTI claw back a ton of time in the late stages of braking and through the middle corner section. In fact, we see a trend here of the GTI and its low speed handling being the match, or the even the better of this GR Corolla in this configuration. GTI gives a little bit back right here once they exit the corner. This is the all-wheel drive of the GR Corolla, hooking up a little bit better in that low-speed exit, whereas the GTI being just front-wheel drive, those front wheels are going to be doing some spinning there, and you're going to be losing a little bit of time. But we see once the GTI hooks up again, it is the equal in acceleration of that GR Corolla, and it is the equal or very slightly better of the blue trace of that GR Corolla through the rest of the lap. Here's the only place we see the GR Corolla clawing back the acceleration, only in very, very high speed. This is above, about 75 miles an hour. Does that GR Corolla start using those 300 horsepower to start pulling away from the GTI? But at least when it comes to the GR Corolla, we are seeing low speed handling of the GTI and impressive mid-range acceleration being what makes the difference in those two cars. So the next comparison we're going to look at is going to be the mighty Honda Civic Type R. This is the current FL5 version, which is the fastest Civic Type R that we have tested at the firm. A veritable dead heat between a current Civic Type R and this Volkswagen GTI that is probably duplicatable for 2/3 of the price of this Civic. So where is the Civic hanging that 1/10.5 on the GTI? Well, we can see that now the red trace here is the Civic, the blue trace is the GTI. The red trace will always be the faster of the two traces in Circuit Tools here, our VBox analysis software. So we can see that again, this Volkswagen has excellent low speed handling. In fact, the VW is pulling back some time from the Civic Type R in the turn 2, 3, or the turn 2 to the exit of turn 2 segment. Really loves those tricky low-speed turn-ins, even more so than the Civic Type R. But we immediately see the Civic Type R start clawing back some of this time through acceleration. 317 horsepower from that Civic Type R. That's gonna make up some ground on pretty much anything. But again, turn in and braking for turn 4. We see the Volkswagen pull back a little more of its own time. Mid-corner speed, we're going to give that nod to the Civic Type R, and that helps it sort of pull back ahead of the GTI. And until this point, the GTI has been ahead on track after that superior run through turn 2, and its excellent low-speed manners. But the high-speed manners of the Civic Type R and the run down to the next corner, we see these acceleration curves coming pretty close to each other through the mid-range, but we start to see the Civic Type R gapping the GTI heading down towards the next section, and it's pulled a pretty substantial advantage on the GTI to the next section. Braking, again, the GTI pulls back ahead of the Civic Type R, and the Civic is actually doing pretty well here in the low speeds of turn 5. On the short run over to turn 6, the GTI, nice run through turn 6 here, keeps things fairly even, maybe pulls back a couple of hundredths. Again, the low speed cornering of this GTI seems to be a bit of a theme, and it is working very well to claw whatever advantage it can from more modern automobiles. Stays pretty even here through the S's, and the Civic probably using its superior power and my willingness as a test driver to pound those curbs as hard as possible to get that Civic through the S's just a little bit faster. And then we see the GTI claw back another big ton of speed here under braking into the tightest corner and all the way through the midsection of the tightest corner. So again, the low speed cornering and low speed performance of this GTI is what is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in its lap times. Got a great run down to the next corner. In fact, the GTI is out accelerating the mighty Civic Type R down to turn 8. That's actually pretty impressive. We see a pause in the acceleration of the Type R here. That's going to be the shift, and then another pause here. We actually do a 2-3 shift, then a 3-4 shift in that Civic Type R. And the GTI with its DSG transmission really taking advantage of just those minor pauses. In fact, we can see on the delta chart here that when we make that shift, we have an instant drop in the delta, and the GTI and its instant shifting DSG is really taking advantage of that, along with some pretty impressive acceleration down to turn 8. Again, the GTI takes back a nice chunk right here on the turn in to turn 8. Gives it right back though through the mid part of turn 8, but takes another chunk back at the exit of turn 8. So wherever the road tightens up, that GTI is right on your tail. And the GTI actually, does another really nice job at accelerating down this next straight, hanging right with the Civic Type R, and again, taking advantage of these shift points of the Civic Type R to claw back a bunch of time. We can see that even up to the very last corner, this GTI was actually ahead of the Civic Type R. It was only in the final corner that the Civic Type R pulled ahead again to gap the GTI by a little more than a tenth. So, can you take a $20,000 used car, throw some parts at it, throw some testing and tuning and sorting at it, and make it the on-track equal of one of these modern cars? yes, I think we have proven that absolutely 100% you can do that through the help of companies like 034 Motorsport and through your own testing, experimentation, and proper sorting. Now, what don't you get in a used Volkswagen that you do get in a brand new Honda? Well, I think the words used Volkswagen are the main things that you don't get. You're not going to get a warranty. You might not get as aggressive of a financing plan, but you're also not going to get the dealer markup that you are paying with some of these modern performance cars. So I think what we proved here is, yes, there are multiple paths to fantastic lap times. Whether you want to save some money, do it yourself, have the satisfaction of being able to say that, yes, I took this car, this raw lump of clay, and I shaped it into something that is equally as good as something that I could walk into a modern dealership and buy off of the showroom floor today. So that right there, I think, is pretty impressive and pretty satisfying.
It's been 2 years and 20,000 miles. Let's talk about reliability with our Mk7 GTI project car. So when we bought this car, it had just under 20,000 miles on it, and our first real problem didn't actually occur until almost 27,000 miles, when we started to notice that a faint coolant smell was getting much, much worse. After some Googling and some talking to the experts at 034 Motorsport, we did realize that the actual problem was a leaking water pump. Now, Mk7 GTIs are fairly infamous for leaking water pumps. Volkswagen actually has an extended service campaign, and the dealer probably would have fixed ours for free, but instead we chose to replace it ourselves at home with a couple $100s worth of parts from FCP Euro. Now, I know what you're thinking. Whew, good thing you changed that water pump. That probably fixes that problem and you won't have to do it again in 20,000 miles. Well, as it turns out, there is no updated part. We put the same flawed design in the car, and it will likely need to be replaced again in 20 or 30,000 miles. It's just a fact of life with Mk7 GTI ownership. The good news is you can change it in a Saturday morning as long as you don't mind your engine bay looking fairly disassembled in kind of a scary way. Now, the second issue with our GTI was actually bad oil burning tendencies. Now, not because it was a blown engine or anything like that, just because it's a somewhat flawed design for heavy track use like we put our car through. The factory PCV system kind of has a little dam that overflows with oil and dumps it right into the intake tract as soon as you go on track. Great opportunity though for me to talk about the sponsor of today's video and this channel, 034 Motorsport. 034 Motorsport makes an awesome billet aluminum PCV valve that fixes the factory flaw, and it makes it really easy to track one of these cars without any oil consumption issues. Installing their catch can, drain back kit, and PCV valve changed this car from something that would use a quart of oil every session to a car that can literally go thousands of miles on track without consuming any oil. I'll put a link in the description with more information about 034, and thanks 034 for sponsoring this video. Okay, our next issue with the Volkswagen was a random misfire in a check engine light that we eventually traced down to dirty intake valves. Like a lot of direct injected cars, carbon builds up on the intake valves and needs to be periodically cleaned off with walnut blasting. Unlike some direct injected cars, Volkswagens need it quite often. Our car managed to make its intake valves filthy by about 40,000 miles. So we had to do that. Now, part of that's the heavy track use with the stock PCV system before we went ahead and upgraded, but still we did have to spend an afternoon and about $100 on Walnut blasting gear in order to clean up our intake valves. And now it's finally time to talk about the worst problem to date on the car, which was every single warning light came on at once. The car started driving weirdly, the car lost its power steering, the car lost its ABS, its stability control. Basically every single thing that could go wrong did go wrong. I scanned the car, came back with something like 80 different codes from every different module, angry about everything. Now, was it time to trade the car in? Had we just turned their $20,000 car into a $2,000 car? As it turns out, this was really just an issue of a dash that cried wolf. The car didn't actually have 80 different problems. It just had a bad left front wheel speed sensor and computers that couldn't quite make sense of the world without it working. So we ended up scanning the car ourselves and diagnosing it, and then we paid a buddy about half an hour of labor to change it out for us. Total cost of the fix, $135, again paying shop prices for that labor. Now, this is a little bit of an issue for the average mechanic because we had to use a professional level scanner to find and diagnose the bad wheel speed sensor, but doing some Googling, we're pretty confident the average owner could have stumbled across it, maybe not known which wheel speed sensor, but had a general idea of that's what was causing all of the lights on the dash. Other than that, the car has been completely flawless over 2 years and 20,000 miles. 3 real issues, maybe only 1 or 2 of those I'd call actual breakdowns, the rest are just life with a modern Volkswagen. Overall, I'm pretty darn happy. The car's been rock solid. The biggest issue in the day-to-day life is that the CarPlay crashes every once in a while, but it's a fantastic companion on track and for the daily commute, and so far we've been getting away with it. Pick up an out-of-warranty Volkswagen, nothing could go wrong. So thank you 034 Motorsport for sponsoring this project, this video, and this channel. I'll go ahead and put a link in the description to learn more about them. And I'm also going to put a link in the description to this fantastic t-shirt I'm wearing. You can find this shirt and many, many more designs on the Grassroots Motorsports store. Buying t-shirts is one way we were able to do this every day instead of having to go out and get real jobs, and we'd really appreciate it if you check out the store and hopefully find a design you like. If you don't need a t-shirt, please subscribe to the magazine, subscribe to GRM+, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and until next time, we'll see you at the track.
Want to see more content like this? Make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. And for more information, visit us online at grassrootsmotorsports.com.